Good evening. My name is Beatrice Rangel. I am a member of the Interamerican Institutes for Development Board, entrusted with international relations, and on behalf of our board, I would love to give you the warmest welcome to Rodolfo Milani's homecoming ceremony to the Inter-American Institute for Democracy. We welcome you from our headquarters in Coral Way with our chair, Mr. Ricardo Israel, Carlos Sánchez Berzaín, our executive director, Luis Beltrán Guerra, board member also, and several very distinguished guests. The Inter-American Institute for Democracy is a private non-profit organization whose objective is the promotion and dissemination of the values of freedom, democracy, human rights, and institutional development in the Americas. Its membership includes scholars, politicians, professional workers, entrepreneurs, men and women of different nationalities. It is a non-partisan think tank that achieves its goals by means of conducting academic research and organizing seminars, colloquia, and conferences in the context of pluralism and tolerance. Its editorial fund disseminates work that contribute to the support and defense of human rights, democracy, freedom, and institutional development. It is our pleasure and indeed our honor to host today the formal incorporation event of such a distinguished member of our community as is Rodolfo Milani. Rodolfo has for over 40 years been helping families and small institutions identify, plan for, and achieve their financial goals. As a B. Riley Wealth Management Advisor, Rodolfo can access world-class investment products and technology platforms, enabling him to provide his clients with leading-edge solutions free of the burdens and restrictions associated with large warehouse firms. Rodolfo previously held senior positions at Merrill Lynch International, Kidder Peabody & Co., Donaldson, Lufkin & Jenrette, Credit Suisse, Dominic & Dominic, and Wunderlich, which was acquired by B. Riley in August 2017. He received a BA from the University of Texas at Austin and his MBA from the Thunderbird School of Global Management. He is a frequent speaker and a panelist on investment-related topics and on Latin American issues at conferences around the world. Rodolfo is president of Friends of Universidad Francisco Marroquin and serves as numerous organizations that support free market ideas, including the Hispanic American Center for Economic Research. Today, we welcome such a distinguished investment talent to our board. We shall cover today the following program. There will be welcoming remarks by our chairman, Tomás Regalado, an incorporation conference titled We Cannot Slow Down by Rodolfo Milani, and the incorporation event led by Carlos Sánchez Berzaín, Executive Director of the Inter-American Institute for Democracy. I will thus call upon our chairman, Tomás Regalado, to deliver his welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Beatrice, and good evening. The Inter-American Institute for Democracy is celebrating today. We're celebrating because we welcome a new member for the board of directors. We also celebrate because each year this institute is trying to incorporate, to be more diverse, and that means more ideas. That means that more exchange of roadmaps to get to achieve our common goal, the most important goal of this institute, which is freedom and democracy in our hemisphere. Today we welcome Rodolfo Milani, whose incorporation conference has a very inspiring title, We Cannot Slow Down. And Mr. Milani is right. No matter the years that we wait, no matter the obstacles, no matter what others say that we cannot do, we will not slow down. And we have to continue until we reach the threshold of freedom and liberty for our hemisphere, total hemisphere, from Canada to the Patagonia. So in behalf of the members of the board here present, on behalf of our executive director, we welcome Rodolfo Milani. Thank you.
Oops. Oh.
Oh,
You have my speech here.
okay.
Thank you. I didn't realize that Beatrice was going to give such a great biography. Part of my remarks were introducing myself, but I feel like that part of it is no longer necessary. She did such a fine job. But good evening, and thank you for being here. My name is Rodolfo Milani, and I'm deeply honored to be invited to join this illustrious board with such a worthwhile mission. I am particularly moved by accepting this honor on the anniversary of one of the most important days in U.S. history and in the history of the struggle for democracy. Exactly 81 years ago today, the United States was attacked at Pearl Harbor, which led to our entrance into the 20th century's quintessential battle for democracy and the turning of the tide in World War II. My comments today will cover a few topics. First, I will give you a summary of my life, which I'm going to skip over now that Beatrice did such a great job with it, and how I became passionate about liberty and democracy. I will then share some of my thoughts on some of the historical and structural issues that have made it so difficult over the years for democracy to thrive in Latin America. Finally, I will discuss the active promotion and growing influence of leftist ideologies in the region by key countries and organizations, both within the region and outside it, and the need to mount an effective cultural and diplomatic response. As Beatrice told you, I'm currently a senior managing director at B. Riley Wealth Management, and she gave you the other companies that I've worked for in the past, and my role as the founder of the Miami Freedom Forum, which is a monthly group featuring national and international speakers. I'm also the founder and chairman of the Churchill Society of South Florida, which is a group that promotes the study of history and brings prominent historians to speak in Miami. And I'm also president of Friends of UFM, which is a 501c3, which supports the mission and legacy of Universidad Francisco Marroquin, which is the world's greatest liberty-focused university. It's located in Guatemala, and she mentioned I speak at Freedom Fest every year on Latin American and investment issues. This brings me here where I would like to share how my past has shaped my mission and what motivates me to accept this honor today. I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina in 1952 in the heyday of Juan Perón's regime. My father was a renowned anesthesiologist. The Asociación Argentina de Anestesiología was founded in our home. My father was a strong opponent of Perón and Peronism. In 1955, he decided to move our family to Houston, Texas. He was 38 years old with 4 small children and a wife who didn't speak English and wasn't crazy about the idea of leaving her large family behind. Everyone told my father he was crazy to leave his position at the university and his prominent status in the medical community. But he believed in himself and in the benefits that living in a free society would provide for us. For the next 50 years, the same people who had told him how crazy he was praised him for his vision. Back then, he was certain that Peronist policies would lead to the downfall of Argentina. And sadly, he was correct. They still haunt the country to this day. It is often said that immigrants tend to be more patriotic than the native-born because they have a deeper appreciation of what the country that welcomes them offers, and they know what it is to be on the other side. This is certainly true in my household. My father was a huge admirer of the Founding Fathers and of the American Constitution. Listening to him every day made me keenly aware that public policy and how politics influences our daily lives. Growing up in this environment gave me a sense of how valuable freedom, political debate, and democratic institutions are to successful, open societies. From a very young age, I was already politically involved. In 1960, when I was 8 years old, I watched both the Republican and Democratic conventions gavel to gavel and was absolutely fascinated by them. In 1964, at the age of 12, I was putting up yard signs for Goldwater in LBJ's Texas. Later, I started the first mock convention in my high school. The late 60s and early 70s were a period of great turmoil in the U.S. and in the world. The Vietnam War and the rise of the counterculture brought on major changes in American society. I must admit that I took a bit of a left turn during these years, continuing through my undergraduate years at the University of Texas in Austin. After spending a year between college and graduate school living and studying in Paris, I returned to complete an MBA at the Thunderbird School of Global Management and was recruited by Merrill Lynch International in New York. It didn't take long after entering the tax-paying workforce to set me back on the right path. In the 1980 election, I rediscovered my roots and campaigned actively for Ronald Reagan. I've been active in Republican electoral politics ever since and have been a delegate to national conventions several times. It was around that time in the early 1980s that I had another life-changing experience. On a business trip to Guatemala, I met Manuel Ayau, former president of the Mont Pelerin Society and founder of Universidad Francisco Marroquin. He had an enormous influence on me and introduced me to the writings of Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek, and Ludwig von Mises, all of whom were personal friends of his. And he made me understand how economic freedom and prosperity go hand in hand. He told me that when he returned from his own studies abroad, one question haunted him. Why is Latin America still so poor? It has abundant resources and a hard-working population, so why the persistent underdevelopment? He concluded that it was bad governments, corruption, poor public policies, lack of economic freedom, and a failure of the education systems. Which brought him to the next question. What is the best way to change this state of affairs? Ayau concluded that to make a truly effective and permanent change in society, he needed to change education. He wanted to create a society where doctors, lawyers, journalists, political scientists, engineers, and pretty much any professional had a deep understanding of the importance of freedom in their societies. So he founded UFM in 1971, and ever since, the university has been graduating thousands of professionals who understand the principles of liberty and economics. Today we are gathered here thanks to the Interamerican Institute for Democracy. It's certainly a beautiful name, but let's allow ourselves to stop for a while and clarify what we really and truly mean by democracy. We tend to think of democracy in terms of the end state, a government by the people or their elected representatives. But this focus on the end state can obscure the necessary preconditions for democracy. Elections alone are not enough. Many of Latin America's most repressive tyrannies have been elected. Mexico had one-party rule, elected rule by the PRI for decades. Venezuela's Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, Bolivia's Evo Morales, the Kirchners in Argentina, Ecuador's Rafael Correa, and Nicaragua's Daniel Ortega were all elected. Most recently, leftist leaders like Petro in Colombia, Boric in Chile, and Lula in Brazil were also elected. Unfortunately, populism, accompanied by the lack of efficient political institutions, create a perfect storm for the politics of envy to take root. Often, a majority of voters fall for messianic leaders who promise to curb the inequities and the excesses of the previous regime and the oligarchies and deliver a more just society. But we all know they end up replacing the old thieves with new thieves. It reminds me of a song lyric from Peter Townsend of the rock group The Who. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And that is simply because the main problem is not the leaders, but the system. A system that lacks one of the most fundamental principles needed to create a free and successful society: limited government. Why and how is it that democratic elections in the U.S. produce democratic governments, but in much of Latin America they just produce unaccountable demagoguery? It is because there are many factors of a successful democracy, not just elections. It is about maintaining the rule of law, separation of powers, checks and balances, a strong and independent judiciary, but most importantly, limited government powers. These key principles need to be embedded in its institutions and, most importantly, in the culture. Back in the 1830s, when de Tocqueville first visited the new United States of America, he noted some unique features here. In his classic work, Democracy in America, he wrote about how the institutions of civil society, like churches, the family, and charitable institutions, played a critical role in the success of the American system. He also warns in his book that for a democracy to succeed, there must be an educated population that plays a key role in overseeing and limiting government actions. On this topic, Winston Churchill once observed that the strongest argument against democracy was a 5-minute conversation with the average voter. It's not that he was skeptical of democracy per se, but that he was aware of the challenges it presented for a society. But Churchill was a realist. He also quipped that democracy could very well be the worst form of government, except when compared to all the others. Today, we can see some of those warnings from de Tocqueville and Churchill take place in our own democracy, the oldest in the world. Free speech and our very history are under assault almost every day. But still, we are better off than most other places in the world because of strong institutional foundations. Our Constitution is now the world's oldest active one. It was designed to limit the power of government and to protect individual rights. No leader would ever dare to disrupt or change it. Neither would the citizens allow it. But in Latin America, constitutions are ephemeral and are often tailor-made for tyrants. Instead of restricting the powers of government, constitutions in Latin America often expand them. Changing constitutions when convenience suits is not merely the fault of abusive leaders. The citizenry also shoulders some of the blame. For centuries in Latin America, the government has been seen as a machine that can provide all the answers and fix all the problems. Government intervention has become the norm and not the exception. In the Heritage Foundation's annual Index of Economic Freedom, which I brought copies for everyone here, the average rank of countries in Latin America is 93rd. Okay. Venezuela ranks next to last at 178th, just ahead of North Korea. It has been proven that economic freedom and economic prosperity are strongly correlated. When governments are permitted to make all the economic decisions, corruption, which has been the plague of Latin America, follows close behind. As libertarian humorist P.J. O'Rourke once observed, when the legislature does all the buying and selling, the first things to be bought and sold are the legislators. Sadly, liberty has not been the norm in Latin America. From the King of Spain to the colonial caudillos, to the junta generals, to the dictators from both sides of the spectrum, government in Latin America has often had an authoritarian flavor. In addition to the endemic corruption among political elites in Latin America, we have had an incredibly concerted effort by multiple leftist regimes and organizations to influence governance in the region. For decades, Cuba was the most notable among these influencers. As the first communist revolution in Latin America, it provided the model. They have been trying to export their revolution to other Latin American countries since Castro took power. Their successes in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Bolivia created what we now call the socialism of the 21st century. In addition to Cuba, we have leftist organizations like the Sao Paulo Forum becoming increasingly influential. The rise of criminal gangs and cartels and the enormous amounts of money brought in by the drug trade has also had a huge corrupting influence on Latin American governments. Cuba has, in recent decades, been joined by other international anti-democratic bad actors, trying to play an active role in internal Latin American politics, such as China, Russia, and Iran. China has the most far-reaching effort by far. As a businessman born in Buenos Aires, who has been traveling throughout Latin America since 1978, I can say the region is being significantly influenced by these outside forces. Back then, there was virtually no Chinese presence in Latin America. But because the world is interconnected, when in 1978 Deng Xiaoping launched the free market economic reforms that transformed China, the whole world also changed, and so did our region. Over the past few decades, China has become the world's second largest economy. It now rivals the U.S. in terms of influence in Latin America. They have accomplished this through trade, investments in critical infrastructure, commercial partnerships, and lending, often taking advantage of weaknesses in Latin American institutions, a lack of transparency in negotiating deals, and a need for investment, even predatory investment, owing in part to the region's prior failures to create conditions adequate to attract private capital. The PRC has also advanced its influence through military exchanges, gifts to security forces, and a distortion of the debate about the nature of its system and who benefits from its engagement through cultural soft power initiatives and buying influence with opinion shapers and political leaders. As we speak, we are witnessing a 21st version of the 19th century's great game, but now it's on our side of the world. Once again, the great powers compete for ideological and economic influence in the less developed world. China takes a pragmatic approach to the economy, working with regimes of all types in pursuit of its key strategic interests: access to commodities, foodstuffs to feed 1.4 billion Chinese people, markets for Chinese goods and services, and access to associated technologies. It arguably secures the most favorable terms from populist governments whose statist projects and generation of capital flight increase their need for Chinese money, while the politicization of their institutions ensure that it is the populist elites, along with the Chinese, who most benefit from China's so-called win-win deals. Since 2010, China-based companies have expanded their position in the petroleum and mining sectors. In agriculture, China is the largest export market for Brazilian soybeans, Argentine beef, Ecuadorian shrimp, and sugar from El Salvador and the Caribbean. Chinese fishing companies are active off both the Atlantic and Pacific coasts of South America. Chinese forestry companies are active throughout the region. 21 countries have joined the Belt and Road Project since its expansion to the Western Hemisphere in 2018. A survey, by no means exhaustive, of China's infrastructure projects across the region illustrates the expansiveness and vision of China's multi-pronged strategy. The Chinese government is involved in building and/or managing ports all over Latin America. They have completed numerous hydroelectric projects, as well as countless wind and solar projects, tens of billions of dollars in energy transmission infrastructure, and even a nuclear plant in Argentina. Surely Latin Americans are benefiting from these investments, but we must ask ourselves, at what cost? In the telecom sector, Huawei and ZTE have become major suppliers to Latin America's commercial providers and government entities and are positioned to play a significant role in 5G development. which can be used as economic leverage. But that is only one side of the coin. In 2017, China's national security law gave the Chinese government the authority to confiscate data of Latin American or other global users to advance its commercial and strategic interests. China's export of the world's most advanced surveillance technology into the region should be raising several alarms. Militarily, Chinese arms companies such as Norinco have leveraged political alignment with anti-U.S. populist governments to sell a significant quantity of military items to the region. And virtually all of Latin America's militaries have sent personnel to training and professional military education courses in China. Culturally, China's 39 Confucius Institutes and 18 Confucius classrooms in the region have become centers of recruitment for identifying future Latin American leaders with a strong interest in China studies who are given free study trips to China. They return grateful to the Chinese government for its role in enabling their careers, and these scholars shape the discourse about China in their countries. It is said that the revolution shall be cultural and intellectual. The Chinese have certainly got that right. Of course, engagement with China comes with a price: corruption, the erosion of democratic institutions, and the consolidation of power by authoritarian governments aligned with the Chinese government. I believe that to change a continent requires changes in culture. To change culture, we must understand the importance of education and the media to shape the values that will shape the society. The left never rests, and we must not either. Since Gramsci in the 1920s and the Frankfurt School that came afterwards, the left has been laser-focused on changing our society from within. They have been engaged in what they call the long march through the institutions. By focusing on taking over education, both higher and lower levels, and the news and entertainment media, they have made extraordinary gains in recent decades. We must engage them on these battlefields. If we don't, we will continue to lose the war. Andrew Breitbart wisely observed that politics is downstream from culture. We are locked in an existential battle of worldviews and ideologies. Either freedom wins or collectivism wins. Ronald Reagan once warned us, freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in their bloodstreams. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on to them to do the same. Or one day, we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it was once like in the United States where men were free. I believe our own State Department has been negligent about Latin America. Our former Secretary of State, John Kerry, declared that the Monroe Doctrine was dead in 2013, and no cohesive U.S. policy has been put forth since then to replace it. We must redouble our efforts to highlight the importance of freedom, limited governments, free markets, and institutions. So I am here today, thankful and honored to accept this challenge, because I remain optimistic that democracy and freedom will ultimately prevail in Latin America, and that organizations like the Interamerican Institute for Democracy will play an important role, and because I believe that inaction is not an option. So I say to you, we must never slow down. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodolfo. That was quite inspiring. Carlos Sánchez Berzaín, our Executive Director, is known for his incredible talent to recruit distinguished people and work with them in difficult yet rewarding task of defending freedom in the Americas. I will please ask Carlos Sánchez to come and take the lead in the Incorporation Act of Rodolfo Milani.
Gracias. Agradecer la presencia de los miembros de nuestro directorio para dar la bienvenida al nuevo componente del equipo, Rodolfo Milani, que como ustedes han escuchado, no necesita presentación en la calidad del aporte que trae al Interamerican Institute for Democracy. A tiempo de darte la bienvenida, Rodolfo, permítame recordar que el Interamerican Institute for Democracy es una organización sin fines de lucro de los Estados Unidos, que está constituida absolutamente por voluntarios, por gente de buena voluntad que regala su tiempo para participar de actividades de promoción, de defensa, que tienen que ver con los principios y valores de la libertad, la democracia, los derechos humanos y la institucionalidad. Una de las reglas de nuestra institución es el pluralismo. Ustedes van a encontrar en el Interamerican Institute for Democracy componentes desde los Estados Unidos hasta el Cono Sur, pero que tienen diferentes posiciones políticas, que han pertenecido a diferentes partidos políticos, que han sido gobierno y que han hecho actividad pública y actividad privada desde diferentes ideologías y puntos de vista. En eso consiste el pluralismo, en podernos reunir para discutir de libertad, de derechos humanos, de democracia, de institucionalidad, al margen de lo que pueden ser posiciones personales, pensando en cómo se puede mejorar la región, cómo se puede mejorar cada uno de los países, cómo se puede mejorar el mundo. Hay gente que a veces señala al instituto y dice, esa es una organización de derecha. Si la derecha ya no existe en el siglo XXI. Esa es una organización que tiene entre sus componentes gente que ha pertenecido a gobiernos de izquierda. La izquierda tampoco existe en el siglo XXI, porque el siglo XXI es un siglo capitalista y globalizado. El capitalismo le ganó al comunismo al empezar la década de los 90, hace 30 y tantos años, y el mundo se ha globalizado y las ideologías han desaparecido. Esto de decir de derecha y de izquierda es marketing, es una manera de ubicar determinadas posiciones en un mundo en el que lo que se está disputando hoy día no es la derecha o la izquierda. En el mundo capitalista y globalizado se está disputando cómo se va a manejar ese capitalismo y esa globalización. Y solo hay dos maneras. La manera de la libertad, a través de emprendedores, a través de la capacidad, a través del desarrollo, a través de la inventiva, a través de la inversión que se produce en sitios donde hay libertad y hay democracia. Y el mismo objetivo, pero a través de la concentración de eso en manos de pequeños grupos que terminan siendo criminales, como la dictadura de China, como la dictadura teocrática de Irán, como la Rusia de hoy día, o como los fracasados proyectos dictatoriales de Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia y Nicaragua. Todos son capitalistas, pero es un capitalismo concentrado en manos que ejercen crimen organizado y que privan y dominan la libertad del resto de sus ciudadanos. Entonces, en ese contexto, ejercemos el pluralismo, pero además practicamos el no proselitismo. No hay campañas electorales en el instituto. Cuando hay campañas tan duras como las que ha atravesado Estados Unidos, por ejemplo, en los últimos años, en el último tiempo, el instituto se margina de esas disputas internas, esperando que la democracia resuelva lo que son confrontaciones temporales. Porque nuestro trabajo, insisto, es el referido a que estamos unidos en base a principios, en base a valores y en base a grandes tareas. Las grandes tareas para la región, para las Américas, es primero cesar las dictaduras. El año 1994, en la primera cumbre de las Américas, solo había una dictadura. Y se ponía en marcha un proyecto ideado por Bush primero, por el presidente George Bush, y aplicado por el presidente Clinton, un republicano y un demócrata, para desarrollar entre Estados Unidos y América Latina una sola región, un solo mercado, con democracia, con desarrollo sostenible y con aplacamiento del crimen y el narcotráfico. Eso se quebró en la cumbre de Quebec y después con la aparición de Chávez, que apoyó a Castro y resucitó el castrismo del siglo XX para convertirlo en castrochavismo, y convirtió una dictadura que agonizaba el año 99 en las 4 dictaduras que conocemos hoy día, Cuba, Bolivia, Nicaragua y Venezuela, con influencia en otros países donde han puesto su mano, como los gobiernos paradictatoriales de la Argentina, con Fernández Kirchner, y de México con López Obrador, y tal vez de Colombia con Petro. Pasa lo que ha sucedido. Entonces, en esa dinámica, las grandes tareas son cesar las dictaduras, educar en democracia. Los jóvenes de este siglo, que han nacido en el siglo XXI, tienen muy poca idea de la historia, tienen muy poca idea de los conflictos con los cuales se ha trabajado, se ha defendido y se ha sostenido la libertad y la democracia hace pocas décadas. Hay que hablar con esa gente, hay que llegar a esa gente, hay que fortalecer la democracia, y otro de los objetivos es separar el crimen organizado de la política. Creemos que el aporte intelectual de Rodolfo Milani en este plano es muy importante, y por eso lo hemos invitado, y a partir de hoy día forma de parte de nuestro equipo, para encarar nuevos desafíos a partir del próximo año 2023, que incluyen el crecimiento de las actividades del Instituto en los Estados Unidos, que incluye el crecimiento de nuestro fondo editorial, que de cerca de 80 libros que tiene publicados en los últimos más de 15 años, ha publicado aproximadamente el 60% en inglés o bilingües, y que supone el desarrollo de una influencia activa para tratar de buscar que los Estados Unidos vuelva a tener una política de Estado, una política exterior de Estado respecto a América Latina. Eso quiere decir que volvamos al statu quo del año 94, donde demócratas y republicanos estaban de acuerdo en qué hacer con América Latina: democracia, no dictaduras, no narcotráfico, desarrollo sostenible, libre mercado, y de pronto eso se ha perdido y se ha convertido el tema de la América Latina en un tema de disputa interna, que es lo peor que puede pasar. Gracias, Rodolfo, bienvenido, y contamos con tu apoyo.
Gracias.
We now conclude the Incorporation Act into the Interamerican Institute for Democracy Board of Rodolfo Milani. Welcome, Rodolfo. Thank you for being with us throughout 2022. Please come back on Monday at the 12th at 10:30 in the morning, that we're going to have very interesting conference with Patrice Bullrich from Argentina. Thank you.